Minnesota versus the federal government, a legal battle over evidence, sovereignty, and a fatal Border Patrol shooting. In early 2026, a fatal shooting by a federal immigration agent in Minneapolis escalated into a fierce legal confrontation between the state of Minnesota and the federal government, a clash that has ignited national debate over immigration enforcement, federal authority, civil liberties, and state sovereignty. At the center of this dispute is Minnesota's bid to obtain crucial evidence and hold federal agents accountable after the death of a Minneapolis man at the hands of U.S. Border Patrol. The incident that sparked it all. On January 24, 2026, Alex Pretty, a 37-year-old intensive care unit (ICU) nurse and Minneapolis resident, was shot and killed by a U.S. Border Patrol officer during a federal immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis. The incident quickly became a flashpoint because of widely circulated video footage and sharply divergent accounts of what occurred. Federal officials initially described the encounter as one in which Pretty approached armed and posed a threat to agents, justifying the use of deadly force. However, bystander video and witness testimony contradict this narrative, showing Pretty holding a phone, apparently recording the federal agents, with his hands raised when the confrontation escalated. This was not the first fatal shooting by federal immigration officials in Minnesota in recent weeks. Earlier in January, Renee Nicole Good, another 37-year-old Minneapolis resident, was shot and killed by an ICE officer amid the federal enforcement operations known as Operation Metro Surge. That earlier killing had already sparked protests and a tense community atmosphere. Operation Metro Surge, a controversial federal campaign. The fatal shootings occurred against the backdrop of an aggressive Department of Homeland Security (DHS) initiative called Operation Metro Surge, a sweeping deployment of roughly 3,000 federal officers, including ICE and U.S. Customs and Border Protection personnel, into Minnesota's Twin Cities and surrounding areas. The federal government framed this operation as an effort to crack down on illegal immigration and associated criminal activity. Yet local officials and community advocates immediately critiqued the surge as a heavy-handed, militarized campaign that cast a wide net in everyday civic life, reaching schools, hospitals, and residential neighborhoods. They argued that such deployments went far beyond typical immigration enforcement and endangered public safety and civil liberties. Minnesota Republican officials supported the federal presence as lawful enforcement of immigration laws. However, state and local civil rights leaders, organizers, and many residents saw the surge as an overreach of federal power that undermined trust and created a climate of fear. Minnesota's legal challenge, lawsuit over evidence and authority. In response to the Pretty shooting and wider enforcement tactics, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison took the extraordinary step of filing a federal lawsuit against the Biden administration's DHS and the Justice Department, seeking to prevent the destruction or concealment of key evidence related to the fatal encounter. The legal filing argues that the federal government has blocked Minnesota investigators from accessing the crime scene and critical evidence, including video footage and physical material, impeding any independent or transparent investigation. According to state officials, DHS agencies denied access to state investigators despite the presence of state search warrants and judicial orders. A federal judge has already issued a temporary order to preserve evidence, with a full hearing scheduled to determine whether Minnesota's requested remedies will stand. The lawsuit highlights what state officials describe as obstruction of justice and a refusal by federal authorities to collaborate with local law enforcement on key investigative steps, contrasting official accounts. The federal government has defended its handling of the case, maintaining that agents acted within their lawful authority and that the use of force was justified under the circumstances. Federal officials have described both Pretty and Good as threats during the encounters and cited concerns for officer safety. Federal authorities have also resisted releasing full evidence or granting broad access to Minnesota investigators, saying that DHS and the Department of Justice are conducting or overseeing the inquiry. This stance has heightened tensions with state officials, who argue that without shared access, the investigation lacks accountability. Political and public reactions. The shootings and ensuing dispute have reverberated far beyond Minnesota. They have sparked protests in multiple cities, nominating cries for greater transparency and accountability in federal enforcement tactics. Prominent Democratic lawmakers, including Senate leadership and members of Minnesota's congressional delegation, have called for reforms to ICE and for ensuring robust civil rights protections. Some have even suggested withholding federal homeland security funding without structural changes to how immigration enforcement is conducted. Conversely, many Republican leaders have defended federal agents as upholding the law in challenging conditions, emphasizing the importance of border and immigration enforcement. They have criticized state objections as politically motivated and resistant to lawful federal action. Broader legal and constitutional questions. Minnesota's lawsuit raises themes of federalism, constitutional authority, and investigative transparency. Beyond the immediate dispute over evidence, key legal questions include: if federal versus state jurisdiction. Can a state compel federal cooperation in investigating the conduct of federal agents operating within its borders? Or access to evidence. What rights do state investigators have when evidence is controlled by federal authorities? Civil rights protections. How should claims of excessive force and due process be handled when federal powers intersect with local communities? Experts say these issues are rarely litigated and could set important precedents for how federal enforcement operations are accountable to state interests and public scrutiny. The ongoing struggle for accountability. As of this writing, the legal battle over evidence preservation and access continues to unfold in federal court, and broader debates over Operation Metro Surge and federal enforcement tactics are likely to persist through 2026 and beyond. For many Minnesotans, the controversy over the Pretty shooting, and the January death of Good that preceded it, has become symbolic of deeper divides in American politics: how to enforce immigration laws while protecting civil liberties, and how to balance federal power with state rights and community trust. Bottom line, what began as a tragic shooting has evolved into a high-stakes legal and political confrontation that could reshape debates over federal enforcement authority, investigative transparency, and the limits of state power in holding federal agents accountable.